Hello everyone, Amy R here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and I am back with another Easter card for my series. And for today's card, I'm using the Studio Caudia Floral Cross stamp set. And I have some distress watercolor paper here in my Mini Misty with the smooth side facing up. I use my anti-static powder tool, and then I lined up my stamp, and then I'm going to stamp this with Simon Says Stamps clear embossing ink. Versamark ink also works, just something that is slow drying, and I stamp that, and I'm going to coat this with white embossing powder. So I'm going to sprinkle that over my image, and then I'm going to melt this with my heat tool. Now the cool thing I've been seeing with this stamp, like I used it, you know, traditionally as is the way it was meant to be, but I've been seeing posts by the Studio Caudia design team stamping the images in corners of a panel. Look up the Studio Caudia website and go on their blog or their Instagram and you will see what I'm talking about. It's very neat how much use you can get out of a stamp like this. I've been very intrigued by all the different uses, and I wish I had more hours in the day. There was even a really gorgeous card done just like, you know, doing metallic heat embossing on dark cardstock. No coloring whatsoever. That looks gorgeous too. But I was determined to watercolor this because one, I love florals, and two, I'm absolutely obsessed with watercoloring, and especially these little Daniel Smith dot charts here. So if you haven't seen my previous videos using these are literally just dots of liquid watercolor that have been put onto these charts and then left to dry, and then all you need to do is pick up the color with either a wet paintbrush, or here I'm just using my little detail water brush. So you just touch it to the watercolor, it reactivates that color, and then you paint with it. Really super simple. Daniel Smith watercolors are amazing watercolors, and they're not necessarily expensive per se, but there's a lot of colors, and to get, you know, a good selection of colors when you're buying tubes like that, it can cost a lot. So that's what I'm loving about these little dot charts is, one, they're convenient, and two, they're pretty cheap. Like I've used this one multiple times in multiple videos, and I still have tons of color left to play with. So I'm literally just picking up the colors. With this one that I just finished doing, I kind of mixed a couple of the colors just to get a more kind of peachy sort of color, because I was trying to coordinate with the pattern paper I want to use. I know, big shocker. People I get grief either way. I get grief for not using my pattern paper, and then when I do use it, people are like, are you feeling okay? Like, you used pattern paper twice. So I am using it again today. So I wanted the colors of the flowers to go with the pattern paper. So for the most part, really simple coloring. Other than like blending a couple colors together to get that kind of orangey peach color, I didn't do anything groundbreaking. I'm just applying the color, and then I let it all dry. And then I'm going to go back in and like, I kind of deepen some areas here of the cross just to, you know, make the white heat embossed lines, you know, stand out that just a little bit more. It's another reason why I like Daniel Smith watercolors is they work really nicely too on this distress watercolor paper. Some mediums do not like distress watercolor paper. They need to be on like full on watercolor paper, if that makes sense. But I find the Daniel Smith colors they go down really nice. They blend nicely. They're kind of, in my opinion, easy to work with. And I'm definitely no expert. So after everything had dried, I just went back in with the same colors and just deepened everything. Just basically just added another layer. Again, nothing too fancy, but it's just amazing how adding that second layer of color really makes the color pop so much more. You especially notice it on this purple one. So just doing the exact same thing, I would just apply the color, and then a lot of times I'll just wipe off my brush so that it's just clean, and then I'm just using clean water to kind of pull out the color a little bit more. So I went along and did that with everything, and then did the same thing to all of the leaves, just so that everything was nice and bright and more vibrant. And then once everything is dried, I shockingly did not use any splatter whatsoever. I don't know what I was thinking. I actually honestly didn't even think about it till now. So didn't use any splatter, let everything dry. And then I die cut this with the new Dotted Patterns wafer die from Studio Caudia, which shockingly, I'm sure she intended it to do this, but it fits this stamp set perfectly. The inner rectangle, anyway, it cuts the inner rectangle in a little frame and then a dotted outer portion. So I used that to cut the purple frame. And then I also used it to cut some of this green cardstock, which I had cut, turned into a rectangle with one of my MFT rectangle stacks, wafer dies. So to create my actual frame, I just cut down a piece of white cardstock to slightly smaller, and I'm just going to adhere this green pattern paper, the outer portion of the frame, with some multimedia matte adhesive. And then once I have this adhered, I'm going to add another really thin line of this adhesive so I can adhere this purple cardstock frame. I just love how it like frames this image. So stuck that in there, and then I'm going to inlay my little watercolor panel onto the inside of this because I die cut everything with that same wafer die. So for this, I'm just going to use my tape runner, apply some adhesive to the back of this, and then inlay that into the frames there. So I've got these like different colors just kind of framing my main image. And then for that green pattern paper, I wanted it to stand out a little bit more. So I'm just taking a little bit of peeled paint distress ink and my blending tool and just sponging that along the edges of the pattern paper. This brings back memories. I used to do this all the time. I used to use pattern paper all the time and ribbon, all the different things. But styles have changed over the years, or my styles changed over the years and what I tend to do. But every once in a while, you know, you bring back the old things. So sponged on a little bit of that green ink just to soften those edges of that pattern paper. And then I had that extra piece of purple cardstock left over when I die cut the frame. And I used that to die cut the word Easter 3 times from that. And then I'm going to stack all 3 of these together with more of this multi-medium matte adhesive, just applying little like dots of that to the sentiment. I'm going to stack that 3 layers high just to give it that depth and dimension that I always love with die cut sentiments. So once I've got the first 2 layers on there, I'm going to add more adhesive to the top, and then I can press the 3rd layer into this. So once I've got all 3 stacked, I'd also die cut some vellum with the little flag sort of a die that comes with the dotted patterns set. So I die cut vellum with that, and I was going to use that to stamp and heat emboss the rest of my sentiment. And I chose the Blessings word from the Floral Cross set. And I just held the banner behind my acrylic block and then slightly curved the Blessings word so it would stamp kind of along the curve of that banner a little bit. That's one of the cool things about clear stamps, and anything that's kind of longer and narrower, it's easy to bend them how you want. So I stamped that with the same clear embossing ink, coated that with the same white heat embossing powder, and then I'm going to quickly melt this with my heat tool. And then once this is melted and had a couple seconds to cool off, to adhere that to my main image here, because it's vellum, and I didn't want to try and add little dabs of adhesive behind the sentiment because I just don't like adhesive showing behind vellum. I just applied the adhesive behind the die cut sentiment and then put my little vellum flag into place, and then I'm using that die cut sentiment to adhere everything down. So it's going to hold everything in place once it's pressed down. It's going to hold that vellum, and then it's going to adhere to my card front, and it's good to go. So I've got that all adhered, and I'd left that Floral Cross image in my Mini Misti, and it was all still centered, so it was perfect to stamp on the inside of the card. So I just grabbed another distress ink. I have said before I don't mind using distress inks to stamp on the inside of the card. They're not formulated for stamping. They're usually fairly blotchy in that, but because I had my Mini Misti, I could re-stamp this a few times and kind of even everything out just so I'd be happy with it. I'm usually not too picky on the inside of the cards. I just like having something on the inside. But because I had my Misti, I was able to re-stamp it a couple times just to smooth it all out. So that finished the inside of the card. And then to put everything together, I'm going to adhere this larger piece of pattern paper. And these pattern papers are from the Bo Bunny Cottontail collection. And I will have links to everything as always. So I'm going to adhere that flat to my card base. And I die cut that with one of the largest rectangle from the MFT A2 Rectangle Stacks Set 1 Dynamics. So I adhered that flat, and then my framed watercolor main image here, I'm going to adhere this with some of the Simon Says stamp foam tape, which I've shown many videos on. It's thinner than our standard 3M foam tape that we all like to use, so I like using this just to give it that little extra bit of dimension, but not too thick or bulky. So applied that to the back of my main image, peeled off the backing, and I'm going to center that onto my card front here. Once I've got that adhered, I decided to coat the die cut Easter sentiment with the Tonic Glitter Gloss. It's just clear with that bit of glitter. So I'm going to brush that over the sentiment just to give it a little extra something, but nothing too crazy. So just carefully painting that on, and I purposely chose the clear because when I'm doing things like this, I don't like using any of the ones with color in them because more often than not I end up slipping and making a mess of my actual card. So I just add that little bit of glitter, and then as a final little bit of embellishment, I have the Studio Caudia sparkling crystals. So I kind of sprinkled those on my card front here, and then I'm going to just adhere them into place with that same multi-medium matte adhesive, just little dabs of that, and that's going to finish off my card. So I will have a link below the video to my blog post with links to all of the supplies used, so you can check that out in the description box below the video as well as on my blog. And thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting on my videos. I really appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye!